Tents were everywhere, garbage piling up like it was a dump site, beer cans floating in the horse trough, and I swear someone had started a bonfire using my barn tools as kindling. My dogs, trained for search, guard, and protection, stood at the edge of the ranch like a disciplined army waiting for a command. Karen, smug in her lawn chair with a megaphone, acted like she owned the place, waving to strangers like they were at some HOA parade instead of illegally squatting on private property. I watched from the treeline, remote in hand, wondering one thing. What kind of person invites 100 drunk strangers to camp on a working guard dog training ranch? Without asking the owner? I never intended to live next door to chaos. When I bought the 20-acre ranch 5 years ago, it was for one reason: peace. I needed a place where I could train my dogs, German Shepherds, Belgian Malinois, and Dutch Shepherds, in complete privacy, away from the distractions of the city. These weren't just pets. They were elite working animals, bred and trained for personal protection, security, and law enforcement support. My business was serious, licensed, and methodical. I had invested tens of thousands into training grounds, obstacle courses, kennels built with climate control, and an underground fence system that worked alongside verbal and whistle commands. My life ran on discipline, early mornings, and routine. Then came the HOA and, more specifically, Karen. She moved in a year after me into the suburban subdivision that butted against the west edge of my land. I had no issues with the HOA at first. They handled their roads and neighborhood events and mostly kept to themselves. But Karen didn't keep to herself. She was a middle-aged whirlwind of control, clipboard always in hand, stopping at nothing to beautify and organize the neighborhood. She viewed the world as one big community project that she had been chosen to lead. Her obsession with being in charge spread from block parties and paint colors to property lines and zoning interpretations. It started small, with complaints about barking, even though my training was scheduled and regulated. Then came passive-aggressive notes about my industrial-looking fences that didn't match the neighborhood aesthetic. I reminded her I wasn't in the neighborhood. My ranch was private land, zoned for agricultural and commercial animal training. The subdivision's jurisdiction ended at the cedar fence she kept trying to peer over. She hated that. She hated being told she couldn't control something. I once caught her measuring how far my irrigation trench extended, claiming it was encroaching on shared space. She got politely shut down by the county inspector, but that didn't stop her from trying again. She once left a pamphlet titled, "How to Make Your Property More Community-Friendly," in my mailbox. I laughed, tossed it, and went back to work. But beneath her sugary smile was a rotting sense of entitlement. I started hearing things from neighbors. How Karen was telling people I was antisocial, possibly dangerous, that no one really knows what goes on out there with all those dogs. A few even asked me directly if I had attack dogs. I corrected them. My dogs are trained to guard, not to harm. They respond to threats, and even then, they respond to me. Still, Karen kept stirring her pot. She'd show up at HOA meetings with new proposals. Buffer zones, noise ordinances, community access trails that would run dangerously close to my property. She was obsessed with bringing shared value to land she didn't own. I didn't think she'd go further than talk. I figured the boundary was clear enough, fenced, posted, and recorded in every legal document imaginable. But I underestimated how far Karen's ego would go when fed by her delusion of power. One day, I saw her at the property line speaking with a local contractor. They were pointing at the tree line that shielded my ranch from view. I walked up to them, calm but direct, and asked what they were doing. She gave a fake smile and said, "Just planning something fun for the neighborhood." I asked her if that something fun involved my property, and she had the nerve to say, "Technically, some of this land looks public. The maps are fuzzy, and I have a contact at the zoning office." That's when I realized she wasn't just annoying. She was dangerous. I clarified once again, in writing this time, that my land was not public, not shared, and that trespassing would be prosecuted. I even installed a few new cameras and extra signage, not because I thought she'd be stupid enough to try something, but because I couldn't shake the feeling she might. I didn't know when or how, but something told me Karen wasn't finished. And I was right, because a week after our confrontation, I noticed cars slowing near the side gate. A couple even pulled over to take pictures. Then came the flyers. A neighbor sent me a photo of one taped to their mailbox. HOA Community Campout. Sponsored by Chairwoman Karen. 2 nights of fun under the stars. Food, games, and nature on our beautiful shared land. There was a badly edited map pointing toward the edge of my ranch with vague dotted lines suggesting it was open space. I confronted Karen again, and she played innocent, claiming it was a mistake, and the map was just an illustration. But when I demanded she call it off, she shrugged and said, "If people show up, what am I supposed to do? It's not like I can control everyone." That was her game. Plant the seed, act innocent, then deny everything when it explodes. I didn't react, at least not the way she wanted. I told her if a single tent touched my land, I would involve the authorities, file trespass charges, and bring legal fire she couldn't dream of. She looked me dead in the eyes, smiled, and said, "You know, you'd be a lot happier if you just let yourself be part of the community." That night, I walked the perimeter of my property, every inch of fence and sensor and gate. My dogs followed, ears twitching, alert but silent. They knew something was coming. I could feel it in the stillness of the air. Karen had plans, and I had a very strong feeling she was going to make her move when she thought I was out of town. What she didn't know was that I had cameras in the trees, backup generators, and a live feed to my phone. I wasn't going to stop her, no, not yet, because if she really wanted to test the limits of private property and poke the bear, I was going to let her walk straight into the lion's den. My dogs had been trained for worse. And Karen? Karen had no idea what she was walking into. I left early Friday morning under the guise of attending a dog training seminar in a neighboring state, something I'd deliberately mentioned within earshot of Karen's gossip squad 2 days before. In reality, I was holed up at a friend's cabin 2 miles down the valley with full surveillance feeds playing on a bank of monitors. I wasn't just waiting to see what Karen would do. I was collecting every frame, every face, every violation, because I had a feeling this wasn't going to be some harmless misunderstanding. By noon, they started arriving. First it was minivans and SUVs, then pickups loaded with camping gear, tents, and coolers. Within hours, there were over a dozen vehicles parked just outside my property's western boundary, and people were following Karen's hand-drawn map straight onto my land. They didn't check maps or ask questions. They just rolled in like they owned the place, following the little decorative flags Karen had planted along the gravel road leading past my eastern barn. I watched it all in real time, fists clenched, jaw locked. They pitched tents in the hayfields, dragged folding chairs into my orchard, and even hung tarps from the training yard's observation towers. I counted at least 20 tents by late afternoon. By sunset, it was 40, then 50. A few makeshift fire pits popped up, and someone had brought a generator to power string lights, which they hung between trees like they were setting up for a wedding. Speakers blared pop music. Teenagers ran wild, throwing frisbees and stomping through tall grass. Some of them stumbled into restricted zones, ignoring the warning signs I had posted in bright red letters. One man even moved aside a do not enter working dog area board and led 2 kids right into a secured field, laughing as he pointed to the kennels. Inside, my dogs stirred, alert but well-trained. They didn't bark. They didn't move. They just stared, still as statues, waiting. It wasn't time yet. Meanwhile, Karen paraded around like a queen at a county fair, wearing a visor and holding a megaphone as she gave tours of what she claimed was HOA-adjacent wilderness space generously donated by the ranch owner. Donated? I nearly crushed my phone watching her say that. She told one group they were welcome to use the barn bathroom if the porta potties overflow. That barn was locked. Yet somehow, by the next hour, it wasn't. One of her volunteers had jimmied the door open with a crowbar, caught beautifully on my hidden camera, and guests started flooding in to use the toilet, leaving beer cans and trash scattered in my tool storage area. Someone even took one of my saddles and propped it on a hay bale for photo ops. My horses, normally calm and accustomed to visitors, were visibly stressed, pinned to the back of their corral, ears back and twitching from the sudden noise. I watched one drunk guy throw a frisbee that bounced off my ATV. Another climbed onto the roof of my storage shed to get a good view for sunset pics. A woman tried to hook up a coffee maker using one of my external generators, probably thinking it was some kind of campground amenity. Every violation was logged, every face recorded. Still, I didn't call the cops. Not yet. Karen's goal wasn't just to trespass. She wanted to humiliate me, prove to her followers that I was powerless on my own land. But what she didn't know was that I wasn't alone. I had over 200 trained canines watching, waiting, and I had every legal document ready for the moment the hammer would drop. But that moment wasn't now. No, now was still observation. The guests multiplied as the sky darkened, and soon there were bonfires crackling dangerously close to my southern tree line, only a few yards from dry underbrush. I saw people smoking and flicking ashes right onto the grass. Children screamed and ran unsupervised through areas where my working dogs had been let out to exercise only days earlier. One boy actually chased a chicken through a kennel corridor. My blood boiled. Karen strutted through the crowd, camera in hand, interviewing campers about how they felt being part of a bold new community tradition. A guy with a drone buzzed it right over my horses' heads, making them rear and scatter. The bonfire now had lawn chairs around it, and someone had started a makeshift DJ booth. The smell of weed floated across the property. I saw 2 people urinate behind my kennel building. Another couple climbed into a horse trailer, probably looking for somewhere private. It was beyond disrespect. It was a full-blown invasion. I scanned the crowd and counted well over 100 bodies, and still they kept coming. Cars now spilled onto the access roads, half of them blocking emergency lanes. I could see someone in a reflective vest waving in traffic like it was a damn festival. And all the while, Karen stood at the center of it like some delusional ringleader, sipping white wine from a plastic cup, spinning lies into a microphone while my land suffered. She didn't just want access. She wanted to claim it, rename it, and erase the boundaries I had fought to preserve. This wasn't ignorance. This was malicious, calculated territory theft wrapped in fake community spirit. She didn't see private land. She saw an HOA expansion project. And she was using smiles, lies, and mob mentality to take it. But the more she took, the deeper she dug herself. Every guest she encouraged, every boundary she crossed, added to the mountain of evidence I was building. My lawyer was already compiling the footage, identifying guests, tracking damage in real time. I had timestamps, faces, license plates, even Karen's own voice, looped through her megaphone, declaring the ranch open to all community members. It was all there. The stupidity, the arrogance, the delusion, all caught in stunning 4K detail. But I stayed quiet, still watching, because Karen hadn't just wandered onto the wrong property. She had stepped onto a field of trained sentinels who could clear that land faster than any police unit in the county. I had the power to end this, but I needed her to go further. I needed her to walk into the trap with both feet, because only then would the dogs be unleashed, and only then would she finally understand the full weight of her mistake. By the time the sun came up Saturday morning, Karen had fully crowned herself queen of the illegal HOA campout, and my property looked like the aftermath of a poorly managed music festival. Trash was scattered like confetti across the training yard, half-eaten food left out near sensitive equipment, and several beer cans were floating in the trough my horses drank from. A portable grill was blazing right next to my barn, unsupervised, grease dripping into dry straw. I watched it all from the monitor bank, eyes scanning every camera feed like a hawk. But now things were different. Yesterday had been about invasion. Today was about entitlement. Karen was no longer playing innocent, no longer pretending this was a misunderstanding. She had embraced the illusion of ownership so fully, she started issuing orders like she was managing a summer camp. A new sign was hammered into the ground overnight, spray painted on wood and nailed right into my oak tree. It read, "Camp Karen, all are welcome." Beneath it, arrows pointed toward tent zones, activity fields, and most offensively, dog petting corral. That last one made my stomach turn. My dogs were not for petting. They were trained protectors, disciplined to remain calm but alert, and most had undergone rigorous training that cost more than Karen's entire front porch renovation. Yet somehow, through either ignorance or sheer audacity, She had convinced people that walking near their kennels and offering treats was not only allowed, but encouraged. Around 10 a.m., a family with 3 kids marched right up to one of the kennel gates, waving pieces of jerky and calling out, "Come here, doggy." I held my breath as one of my alpha males, a Malinois named Vex, stood up and slowly approached the gate. He didn't bark. He didn't growl. He just stared with the kind of controlled stillness that only comes from years of training. The mother knelt down, coaxing him closer, completely unaware that Vex could go from still to full tactical mode in less than a second if he perceived even a hint of threat. Luckily, he didn't move, but it was a hair's breadth away from disaster. That was my breaking point. I switched the monitor to my southern paddock camera and spoke into my phone. My assistant, Tony, was on standby and ready to act. "Begin prep phase," I said. He acknowledged and began moving dogs into their ready positions, far enough from the crowd to remain unnoticed but close enough to respond on command. I wasn't releasing them yet, but from this point forward, I would control the property like a chessboard, and every dog was a piece being moved into strategic position. Meanwhile, Karen decided it was time for her morning announcement. She stepped up onto a hay bale platform she'd fashioned into a makeshift stage and spoke through her ever-present megaphone. "We're extending the camp out through Sunday night," she said, her voice echoing across the property. Cheers erupted. Someone banged a pot like it was a drum. Karen went on to explain how she had spoken to the ranch owner, and that he was so thrilled by the community spirit, he'd agreed to let them stay longer. That lie punched me in the gut harder than any trespasser. My name, my integrity, being twisted into her propaganda? It was beyond infuriating. She even had the gall to say, "He doesn't like to socialize, but he believes in unity. Let's respect the land and keep having fun." The contradiction was unreal. Respect the land while stomping holes into it. Unity while illegally occupying someone else's property. Her voice was sugar-coated venom. Guests took her words as gospel, and some even started treating the place like a public park. One guy attempted to play soccer in my dog obstacle course, knocking over a wall of weave poles. Another guest backed their SUV so close to my feed shed that they dented the side panel and left a folding table propped up against it. Karen, oblivious or willfully ignorant, handed out marshmallows to kids and planned a nature scavenger hunt, which sent groups wandering deep into the Eastern Grove, an area where motion sensors had now been silently triggered. Every footstep, every trespasser was logged. Then came the conflict. Around noon, a guest named Marcus, probably one of Karen's HOA cronies, attempted to open a locked gate to the upper training zone, the one marked with a bright yellow private, authorized trainers only sign. When it didn't budge, he looked around and called over a few friends. Together, they hopped the gate and began walking around the training yard like they were inspecting a public facility. I activated the loudspeaker from my phone. A sharp, clear voice rang out. "You are trespassing in a restricted area. Please exit immediately." They froze, looked around, then laughed. "Guess the ghost dog's talking," one of them joked. I repeated the warning. This time, Vex and 2 others stood at attention within the gated zone, their bodies rigid, eyes locked onto the intruders. One bark, a deep, thunderous bark, cut through the air. Marcus backed up fast, stumbling over a log, then scrambled back over the gate, shaking. He told Karen what happened. Her response? "Oh, it's just a recording. Nothing to worry about." That was her entire philosophy. Nothing to worry about. Just ignore the signs. Pretend it's yours. Keep pushing. That night, things escalated again. Karen had organized a karaoke contest, which involved hauling a second generator up near the barn and plugging in a portable sound system. Microphones screeched through the field as amateur singers belted out 80s ballads, while my horses paced in their enclosures, ears flat from the noise. Tony reported that 2 dogs were refusing food out of stress, and one younger shepherd had curled into a corner, trembling. These dogs weren't just animals to me. They were my partners, my livelihood, my family. And now they were suffering. For what? Karen's ego trip? At around 11 p.m., A group of guests set up an impromptu beer pong tournament on the roof of my tractor garage. They dragged up plywood, created a table, and started drinking like they were in a college dorm. One guy fell off the edge trying to grab a cup and landed in my irrigation ditch. I watched him crawl out, soaking wet, laughing as if it was just part of the experience. My teeth were grinding so hard I tasted metal. I turned to the feed labeled Zone Red. The dogs were ready. Their posts were manned. I had coordinated with Tony so that every sector had silent handlers nearby. We had practiced these formations hundreds of times, for drills, for demonstrations, for contracts with clients who needed proof that our dogs could do more than bark. They could protect. They could control. And when the moment came, they would respond with precision. But that moment wasn't here yet. Not quite. I needed Karen to go further. She hadn't reached the edge of madness yet. No, she still believed she was untouchable. Still believed this land was hers to bend and shape. But soon she'd break the one rule even her arrogance couldn't justify. And when she did, I'd be waiting. My dogs would be waiting. And the ranch would become hers no longer, but a courtroom-sized exhibit of everything she had done wrong. By dawn on Sunday, the final day of Karen's self-declared community campout, the situation had shifted from infuriating to outright dangerous. There were now more than 130 people on my land, tents spilling into the southeastern pasture where foals had been raised, and 2 of my upper paddocks had been trampled flat by tire tracks from someone's lifted truck that had decided to off-road for fun. I watched from the surveillance hub, my face lit in the dim blue glow of monitors, coffee untouched at my elbow. I hadn't slept more than 20 minutes at a time. Not because I couldn't, because I wouldn't. Karen had transformed my ranch into a reckless playground, and I wasn't going to miss a single second of what came next. She had gone too far already, but she wasn't finished. If the first 2 days were about her delusional power grab, Sunday became about her descent into full-on mania. It started at breakfast. She called an all-camper meeting and stood on top of a wooden picnic table like she was some kind of survivalist leader. "We've shown what community can do," she said through her cracked megaphone, hair wild from humidity, her HOA sash stained with wine and dirt. "We have reclaimed this land from neglect. We've brought it to life again." Reclaimed. That was the word she used. As if I were some absentee landlord, as if my ranch, a functioning, regulated, legally protected business, was some forgotten backlit in need of rescue. She announced that the campout would now become an annual tradition, one that she would personally coordinate. "We'll call it Camp Karen," she declared again, and this time, the crowd roared like they were part of some twisted cult. Then came the moment that pushed the line from insult to criminality. Karen told everyone, "We've decided to move some of the dogs today. Let them out so people can interact with them. Animals should be part of the community too." My entire body stiffened. I stared at the feed showing Karen leading a group of her volunteers toward the training barns. 3 men and a woman in flip-flops, 2 of them carrying bolt cutters. They walked casually past signs reading "Authorized Personnel Only" and "Do Not Enter Guard Dog Area," as if the warnings were just part of the scenery. I activated the loudspeakers again, issuing a final, sharp warning. "You are entering a restricted training zone. This is private property. Turn around immediately." Karen looked directly into one of the cameras, smiled, and waved. Then she said, with the smugness of someone who believed she was untouchable, "We'll take it from here." One of the men started working on the lock. I muted the feed. I didn't need to hear the snap of steel. I could feel it in my bones. Meanwhile, out in the field, things were unraveling. With Karen focused on her dog liberation, the rest of her guests ran unchecked across the property. A teenager drove an ATV through my irrigation trench, rupturing a pipeline. A group of kids climbed onto my hayloft ladder and tossed bales down just to jump in them. 3 tents had been pitched in my composting zone, and one family had broken into the apple cellar thinking it was a fun root house. One man parked his truck next to my propane tank to warm up the grill. A couple built a blanket fort inside my training amphitheater and wrote "Love Shack" on the door in marker. It was a full-scale occupation, and the sense of safety that once defined my land had been chewed to bits by Karen's self-righteous crusade. Meanwhile, Tony was prepping the dogs for Phase 1. They weren't just scattered across the ranch anymore. They were positioned. 40 dogs were now stationed in ready zones, divided into response squads of 10, each led by one of my top handlers, all legally on site and fully briefed on the operation. Our goal wasn't harm. It was control. These dogs weren't here to attack. They were here to drive out chaos with calm dominance, the way a seasoned sheepdog corrals a frightened flock. But until I gave the signal, they waited, breathing in unison, trained to respond to a single whistle command or hand gesture. I walked outside for the first time since Friday and stood at the treeline behind the eastern barn, a radio in one hand, binoculars in the other. The ranch smelled like spilled beer and smoke. My orchard looked like it had hosted a motocross event. The land I had poured sweat into for years, the land my dogs had run across in the still hours of dawn, had been transformed into a ruin of ego and entitlement. But then the final trigger came. Karen returned from the barns not with dogs, but with cages. 3 carriers. Inside were pups. My new trainees, only a few months old, not yet cleared for exposure, still in Phase 2 of training. Karen had taken them from their kennel, likely thinking they were friendly mascots or showpieces. She placed the carriers near her stage and told the crowd, "Let's introduce everyone to our junior campers." People began approaching, clapping, cheering, sticking fingers into the grates. One woman even tried to open a latch. I was already walking, already moving down the back hill, radio to my mouth. "Tony," I said, "we're green light. Hold until my whistle. Lock Phase 1 in place. No contact. Just flush." He confirmed, calm as always. "Dogs are in position. We're locked." I kept walking. The crowd was too loud to hear the dogs taking positions behind brush lines, inside barns, beneath blind spots. They didn't hear the final click of gates closing. They didn't notice when Tony switched the emergency signage to read, "Active training in progress. Do not approach." Karen was too busy live streaming herself giving a motivational speech. "We've made something special here. We've built something beautiful. This is what a community is. That's when she saw me. I stepped out from the treeline, dressed in all black, boots silent on the dry grass. Radio clipped to my vest. Karen's smile froze mid-sentence. I didn't say a word. I raised 2 fingers, placed them in my mouth, and blew a sharp whistle. It echoed across the property. First, silence. Then the sound of disciplined fury. Not barking, not chaos. Movement. The kind that doesn't make noise but makes itself known. Dozens of dogs appeared as if summoned by the land itself, streaming from barns, cresting over hills, moving in perfect V formations like synchronized units. They didn't run wild. They didn't lunge or growl. They flowed like shadows, surrounding the campers in concentric circles. One guest screamed. Another tried to run, but a line of shepherds cut them off and herded them back to the clearing. The chaos was turning inward now, collapsing like a bad carnival ride. Karen tried to grab her megaphone, but Vex, leading Squad Alpha, placed himself right at her feet and sat, motionless. Just stared. She froze. The dogs didn't touch anyone. They didn't have to. They showed up in full force, perfectly placed, trained to corral, to isolate, to flush. Every single trespasser was pushed toward the eastern exit path, funneling like cattle through the fire lane. And still the dogs held. Still they obeyed. This wasn't violence. It was justice. Karen had wanted to turn my land into a circus. But now the ringmaster had lost the spotlight. And the finale was only just beginning. By the time the final group of trespassers stumbled down the eastern fire trail, sweating and shaken, most barefoot or carrying what little they could in panicked arms, the ranch had transformed from a lawless festival ground back into what it truly was. A controlled, disciplined environment where order ruled and chaos never stood a chance. The dogs held their formation for a full 30 minutes, quiet and imposing, until every unauthorized guest was off the property. I gave the hand signal and squad by squad, they peeled away, returning to their handlers, tails high but calm, like warriors after battle. No bites, no injuries. Not one dog had disobeyed. The only scars left were on the pride of those who thought they could take what wasn't theirs. Karen, however, hadn't fled with the others. No, she had collapsed onto the ground near the hay bale stage, holding her megaphone like it could protect her, rocking slightly as Vex remained in front of her, eyes locked on her trembling hands. She wasn't crying, not yet, but the bravado had drained from her face. She looked smaller now, stripped of her delusion, her kingdom turned to dust beneath her own feet. I approached, slow and measured, while Tony stood just behind me with a folder in hand. Karen finally looked up, eyes wide, her mouth forming the beginnings of an apology or an excuse or another one of her gaslighting slogans. But I cut her off with one raised palm. "Don't speak," I said flatly. "Just listen." I reached into my jacket and pulled out a remote. I pressed a button, and the portable speaker we had hidden nearby clicked to life. Her own voice played on a loop. "We've reclaimed this land. The ranch owner is thrilled. Everyone's welcome. The dogs are part of the community now." Another click. Footage rolled on a mounted screen showing Karen leading people past fences, instructing guests to pet the dogs, her hand on the bolt cutters, her fake flyers. I turned the volume down and spoke low. "This is all going to the sheriff, to my lawyer, and to the insurance company. Every second is documented, from the first tent to the last breath of this ridiculous campout." Karen swallowed hard. "It was supposed to be. It was just community fun. I didn't mean harm." "You did mean to steal," I said. "You meant to rewrite boundaries. You lied repeatedly. You endangered children, animals, and you led an armed trespass onto private land. You broke into my buildings. You damaged my equipment. You harassed my animals. And worst of all, you thought you were above the law because you thought you were doing it for the greater good." She shook her head. "But it brought everyone together. Not the way you think. This isn't togetherness. This is delusion. And now it's criminal." I motioned to Tony, who stepped forward and handed her a thick envelope. "This is a cease and desist, a formal trespass warning, and a civil damages claim that, after evidence is compiled, will likely exceed 6 figures. And that's not counting the criminal charges that may follow once the sheriff's office reviews all of the footage." Karen's lip trembled. "You can't. I mean, I was just trying to." "You were trying to play queen," I interrupted. "But this isn't your castle. This is my home. And the law doesn't bend to self-appointed titles." Just then, the distant sound of sirens echoed up the road. I'd notified local authorities the moment the dogs began their operation. Not for backup, but for closure. I wanted them there to see the aftermath, to see what Karen had done. Not just to my land, but to her reputation, her authority, and her illusion of control. 2 cruisers pulled up and deputies stepped out, visibly stunned by the condition of the ranch. Torn tents, beer cans, fire pits, broken fences, and the controlled presence of well-disciplined dogs lining the edges of the scene. One deputy, a longtime acquaintance named Breck, approached me with a brow raised. "So, this the HOA campout I heard about?" I nodded. "You'll find everything in the drive. I emailed footage, statements, property damage logs, maps, guest lists, even her announcements." Karen tried to speak again, but Breck held up a hand and said, "Ma'am, I'm going to need you to come with me, for questioning, not arrest." "Yet," he looked at me, "you want to press charges?" "Yes," I said without hesitation. "On every count." They escorted Karen to the cruiser, her shoulders hunched, her megaphone dangling from her wrist like a broken symbol of everything she thought she controlled. As she was placed in the back seat, I heard her mutter something about how people were going to turn on me, how I'd be hated in the neighborhood. But the truth was, by the time I returned to my front gate later that evening, there was a line of cars waiting. Not protesters, neighbors, apologizing, bringing envelopes of money, handwritten notes, offers to help repair fencing, to reseed the trampled fields, to repaint the shed someone had tagged with Camp Karen Forever. Word had spread quickly, and unlike Karen, they realized this wasn't a joke. This wasn't spirited community action. It was trespassing. It was theft. It was insanity. and they were embarrassed to have been part of it. One woman, eyes red, handed me a drawing her daughter had made of the hero doggies. Another man, who'd previously signed Karen's noise complaint petition, stood there for 20 minutes, helping me carry damaged gear back to the barn in silence. It didn't undo the damage, but it helped remind me not everyone was like her. Over the next week, legal wheels turned fast. Karen was removed from her position on the HOA board. She tried to rally her followers, but the footage had gone viral, shared not by me, but by one of her own guests who'd filmed the dogs encircling the camp like a tactical unit. Online commenters dubbed them the Justice Pack. Local news stations picked it up. Karen became a public cautionary tale. The HOA distanced themselves. Her husband, who hadn't been involved, quietly put the house up for sale. Last I heard, she moved 3 towns over to a gated condo development. No HOA leadership role this time. Just a quiet life and a deep stain on her record. My ranch took months to fully restore, but the land healed faster than I expected. The dogs returned to normal, the fields regrew, the fence was rebuilt stronger. And my reputation didn't just survive, it soared. Business tripled. Clients who saw the footage lined up to book my dogs. One even joked, "If those dogs can handle Camp Karen, they can handle anything." And he wasn't wrong. In the end, it wasn't about revenge. It was about restoration. About showing that arrogance doesn't override law, that false kindness is no shield against consequence, and that when you train protectors, real protectors, sometimes the best defense is to let the storm come right to your doorstep. Then open the gate and let the dogs do their job.